So welcome back to the Hornthrowers podcast. We are joined by some of the team from the book Black Metal Rainbows, and been trying to organise this for some time, and it's kind of like lined up really nicely so that it's happening in Pride Month. So it's kind of like our Pride special. But yeah, like welcome to the podcast, and thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having us.
So like usually we start like the podcast off like kind of like asking guests what their introduction to both like extreme metal music and extreme politics was, like, you know, kind of like how you like, you know, discovered kind of like heavier music and also kind of like, you know, like far left politics, etc. Just a nice opening.
You want to go?
Okay.
Okay, I can start. So my introduction to extreme music was in the early 90s. I was into Nirvana, and that was sort of the kind of I was into pop music, and then I got into Nirvana. That was kind of my gateway into heavy music. And then when Kurt Cobain died in 94, that left this kind of huge hole. So that sort of pushed me to explore. First it was other grunge bands, Stone Temple Pilots, Soundgarden, stuff like that. Then I sort of moved into sort of industrial, death and black metal, and then I just kind of, that was sort of the rabbit hole that kind of happened at that time. I had a friend who, he played guitar, and he'd lent me lots of like CDs, Immortal, and in fact I still have the pile of CDs. I never gave it back, so one day I'll give it back to him. As for left-wing politics, I think, I come from a left-wing family. I was always on the left. More sort of got radicalized, as it were, in grad school, when there was, I did my PhD at NYU, and there was a strike of the grad students. So that kind of environment kind of opened up my mind to sort of the realities of the labor market for academics, which is sort of moving very much in a kind of direction of precarity and adjunctification. So that was sort of my awakening to sort of left-wing politics in a more kind of personal sense, in which I could sort of see my future kind of identifying in that.
Interesting. Just I don't know who wants to go next, kind of explaining their introduction to those things, or
Okay, so my I think my backstory is with the music is very similar. So that's probably also a generational thing. The Nirvana trajectory was very much absolutely the same scenario. That said, I was a very religious child. But that has nothing to do with my family. It was a kind of personal choice, and I think my family was kind of perplexed about it for all sorts of reasons. Because I come from a context where in Eastern Europe, where religion has never been like a big social institution, even nowadays. And then I think there was like a huge collision between things like Nirvana, Orthodox Christianity, and my own queerness. So it just didn't work out well. Let's put it that way. And then I think in this whole kind of hodgepodge of things, I think Jesus Christ lost the battle. And I just went on with grunge. I think I had a hippie period, of which I'm not proud.
nice.
Uh, but I have to say I still love Jimi Hendrix, because Jimi Hendrix is basically beyond everything. So I think it's kind of like metal in sense. And then a person from I come from a mid-sized city in Bulgaria. A person that I know, a queer friend, introduced me to Coil, and that's how the industrial 80s of the British scene became my lifetime kind of soundtrack. Because I mean, later on, I think it was like in early 2000s, I got into metal and some kind of crossovers. I think one interesting influence was Nuclear Blast. That was a big thing in the 90s and early 2000s in Eastern Europe. I think it was just the distribution networks, how it worked, and maybe to some extent cold meat industry. But I think that was and I think my metal has never been thrash or death or anything like that. I like I don't know, I think I listened to stuff like Napalm Death, for example, and very easily went from Napalm Death to Scorn. So in terms of black metal, I don't think I'm very representative in some way. And for the politics, I don't think I've politicized music before I went to university. To be quite honest, what happened with me is once I got into my undergrad program in philosophy, I also parallel to that almost immediately started dealing with the then very early Bulgarian LGBT activism, and that's how I got politicized about pretty much anything. But again, I have a short-lived phase of being identifying as political liberal, which I'm not proud, just like with the hippie thing. And then over time, I just discovered that, you know, liberalism and political liberalism isn't actually a honest form of doing politics. And I ended up reading Marx and Engels and stuff like that. And yeah, I think that's the backstory.
Cool.
Yeah.
Cool.
But just to finalize, having said that, being a left-wing queer activist in Bulgaria in the early 2000s was a no-no. It was a big no-no. And 20 years later, it's a little bit better, but it's still very, very controversial.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, that's interesting, because I think there's probably like a lot of cultural context that we're probably missing being from the UK, where sort of, I suppose, our gay liberation movement kind of like it's a bit earlier, and kind of like it's not amazing, but it at least seems to have been strides made that maybe other countries haven't yet.
I mean, our country has gone
It's getting
way
it's
down
yes,
the
it is.
list.
I suppose it was mainly just specifically about like gay activism, not like the whole ET umbrella.
Mhm.
But yeah. Oh, and how about yourself?
Yeah, that leaves me. My name is Jackie. I probably started getting into heavy music when I was kind of young, because in the car my parents always listen to classic rock radio, which is like just you know, Led Zeppelin, like whatever, like The Who, Rolling Stones. And I remember being like 8 years old in the backseat of the car, and I asked my dad like what that was playing on the radio, and it was Don't Fear the Reaper by Blue Oyster Cult. And I was like, this is my favorite song. And my dad was like, this? And I was like, yes. Like, I was very emphatic about it. And then, you know, same thing, like I started listening to like Soundgarden and like Stone Temple Pilots, like on the radio. And I had this little cube alarm clock, which I think everyone had in the 90s. And like, I didn't want my parents to know that I was interested in music. I don't know why. But I was like, I would lay with my ear right next to the speaker and like listen to music when I was supposed to be in bed. And I'd be like, this is awesome. And then I got waylaid by girl bands and boy bands like Spice Girls and Backstreet Boys and NSYNC, because that's what my friends were listening to. And then I started dating my first boyfriend, and he was like, all right, you're going to listen to Metallica and Black Sabbath, and I'm going to quiz you on the names of these guys, and these are super important. And I think that was like the beginning of me going like, oh, like this is what I was always meant to be listening to. And like to this day, they are still two of my favorite bands, but like they are, you know, like the best gateway band I think that I could have had at that point. And then it kind of just devolved from there. And I just got into like worse and worse, like death metal and black metal, like in college. And there was definitely a point where I liked folk metal that it doesn't hold up as well as I thought it might. Like, cause I listened to it like recently and I was like, maybe not. But
so me and Danny's partner were friends like long before like I met Danny and stuff, and when we first met like 10 years ago, were both very much in this like huge like folk metal binge at that time, and like 50% of it probably doesn't hold up, but then we had like a a near religious experience recently when we all went to see Fin Troll together.
I feel like, yeah, if Fintroll ever toured near where I live now, I would probably still go. I feel like that would be an experience.
I was in
And
the
then
because they were supported by Scalmold, and they were my favorite out of the two. So I was in the minority there, though. But they were
They
amazing.
were both good, but I had like a lot more like nostalgia for
Yeah,
Fin Troll.
I never used to like folk metal, and then my partner really likes it, so it's been forced on me. So
yeah, it comes for us all, I think, at some point during our lives. And then as far as like activism, like I have to say I was a very thoughtless child when it came to that stuff, because again, growing up in the 90s, like it didn't really like occur to me to be political. I think my parents were always Democrats, and I was always like, oh, like that, you know, like I could agree with these things. And then when I was in college, we had a pretty big gay population at my school. It was kind of a small school in upstate New York, and for whatever reason, like, and this is before gay marriage was even like a thing, like our mayor of the town started marrying gay people, and I don't know, I don't think it was legal, but he was just doing it. And because of that, like we kind of got like nationwide attention, and the Westboro Baptist Church came to protest with their stupid signs and their kids holding the signs. And like I went with everyone to like protest that, and like so we all stood with our backs to them and like whatever. But like that was like the little light bulb went off over my head, and I was like, this is an important thing to do, and I like being a part of this because I feel like I'm on the right side of like this line that has been drawn. And then also like my dad has worked, well, he's retired now, but he worked as a train engineer for Amtrak, which is like a pretty big train company, whatever, in the States. And like so he was a big part of the union for a while, and like that was, it didn't really occur to me until later in life, but like the amount of work that he put into making sure that the people in his union got all of the back pay that they were like, they, what's the word I'm looking for? Like they were owed a lot of back pay in this instance, right? Like they hadn't gotten a raise in like probably over 10 years. And I think they got a raise at some point of like a penny like per hour, which is just insulting. And so my dad like went and fought for like all of the back pay, and actually went and like met with the senator of New York at the time and was like, I insist on getting every penny for everyone involved. And he did, and people got a lot of money that they were owed, because the federal government is the one that pays like at least part of Amtrak's like operating costs. So that was also a light bulb that went off over my head, and I was like, this is also important because workers have a lot of things working against them, and it's up to us to make sure that we fight for what we deserve. So
It's pretty rad, to be honest.
yeah, it just occurred to me as well. Like it seems like rail is always like a focus, because like in the UK at the moment, like
We have a heavily privatized system.
yeah,
Yeah.
But then there've been like rail strikes for like the whole of the past year, and I think they're still carrying on. And there is like, since like we had like a kind of radical, well, center left
Yeah, like a
politician
social
leading,
democrat.
leading our like Labour Party, and then he got like crushed by his own party and the media and everything. And since then, it's been like there's not really been anyone, but now there's a guy called Mick Lynch, who is like the head of the RMT. Is it the RMT? Yeah, like the union for like, it's not even like train drivers, it's like everyone else that works on the rail. And like he's like a cult hero in the UK now.
Well, the thing is, he's able to talk about like class politics in a way that people can understand, and he's really good at cutting through media bullshit. And he will just outright point out when journalists or like sort of right-wing pundits are outright lying on air, and he kind of doesn't play their game. It's pretty cool.
Yeah, that's invaluable. We had a potential rail strike here in the States not too long ago, and Biden actually voted to shut it down, which I was furious about, because I was like everyone should strike anyway, because they have like no sick days and they have like no benefits. And I remember even talking to my dad when I was little, and he was like, I was like, what happens if you're sick? And he's like, well, sometimes I go to work, because if I don't go to work, I don't get paid. Like they don't have a sick day. Like, that's ridiculous. So like, my dad is, he was doing that for years and years, and this, we're talking like he started in the 70s, I think, and to this day it's like, what, 50 years later and we still don't have this. It's ridiculous. And like, they can't do anything about it because the government can be like, well, you're not striking, fuck you.
Jesus.
Yeah, that is a U-turn, but we'll go back to the main topic, the book. So
Yeah.
what this usually happens in the podcast. We have absolute tangents.
I mean,
and
they're
it's-
usually related to like swords and things like that most
Yeah,
of the time. But
because he does historical reenactments, so usually black metal people like swords, and he usually ends up getting these swords out. But or his degus will derail the conversation.
yeah, I have like two degus that are called Ted and Fenris, and they're really good up until the point they know that we're recording for some reason, and then they want to get out of the cage and start rattling and causing mayhem.
Yeah. So yeah, the book. How did you guys get into like the academic side of metal? Because I know when I was in uni in my third year, I really got into like the metal studies sort of thing. Because I was doing like a film and media degree, so I was doing films most of the time, and then I tried to figure it all out, and I ended up doing something completely different. But I went down a rabbit hole of like looking into all this like really cool like analysis of like metal I'd never thought of before. So I just wondered how you all got interested in that sort of stuff.
Well, I worked for as a music journalist for a while. So when I was in college, I started writing for Terrorizer and Kerrang. So then I moved to the US and I was still writing for Kerrang, and then I went back to grad school. So at a certain point, it kind of made sense to sort of combine the two things. So my first foray into sort of looking at metal from an academic point of view was an article I wrote for Helvete magazine, which is a journal, sorry, which was a journal of black metal studies. I don't know if it's defunct now.
It's defunct. It doesn't exist anymore.
It doesn't exist anymore, but it was pretty cool at the time. And this Helvete magazine, journal, kind of comes from the whole sort of black metal theory area, this kind of para-academic field, which was spearheaded by Nicola Masciandaro, which our project kind of grows from. So black metal theory had some symposia, some books came out of it, and it was basically sort of different from metal studies in that it wasn't just sort of looking at black metal as a sort of object of inquiry, but it was kind of engaging with it or using it as a sort of tool. So it was sort of kind of respecting it as a sort of philosophical framework or a philosophical tool, which you could sort of use to kind of make your own, whether it's theoretical or practical sort of interventions in the world. So this field was, it was very interesting. It is very interesting. At the time, it felt like it was sort of reproducing a kind of esoteric, obscurantist, Nietzschean kind of view of the world. So this kind of like, I hate everybody equally, and yet it sort of ended up reproducing something of this sort of white male kind of aggrieved sort of default position. So basically, I organized a conference in Dublin in 2015 with someone called Michael O'Rourke, and it was called Coloring the Black. And basically, the goal of this symposium was to sort of inject some color and some queerness into black metal theory. So, we put out a call for papers. There was a lot of kind of pushback online, death threats. This website, deathmetal.org, just kind of targeted us and sort of wrote some hostile things about us. But in the end, it was a great symposium. It was in Dublin, 2015. Drew Daniel was there from Matt Moss and the Soft Pink Truth. Christoph Spasdel, who's the Lord of the Logos, who did famously did the Emperor logo. He made a logo for us, and he had just finished designing a death metal logo for Rihanna. So he had worked with Rihanna, and they'd done this logo, which was also full of colors. So with Christoph, we kind of did this online competition where we, he made this Coloring the Black logo, and then he invited, his followers to sort of fill it with color or color it somehow. So like plenty of them did it. Others like pushed back, and they was like, this is horrible, this is gay. And it was like, okay, well, that's fine. Yep, so he did the logo, and then basically, so the conference was good, and Andy from Kaina also gave a paper via Zoom, or maybe it was Skype at that point. And so basically, a few years later, I thought, well, let's try and make this into a book. So I contacted Stanimir, who had given a great paper with the title Sad Rainbows. So just like the name, I wanted to have the rainbows, and just like the name Black Metal Rainbows just kind of came to me. So from there, we basically, we approached some people who'd given papers at the symposium to develop theirs into a chapter. And then, but it really kind of snowballed and avalanched beyond that. So it became this often sort of unwieldy project going in all these different directions. We wanted to put art in there. We wanted to have different types of papers, not just sort of academia, but also journalism, memoir, confessional, weird theory fictions, and so forth. So basically, that's kind of the origin story of how this happened.
Yeah, I think. Sorry, go.
Oh, I was just going to comment that it was kind of a sad reality that anytime somebody tries to like look at metal in any kind of a critical way, and it's completely fine to be critical of something that you love and kind of like look at the bits of it that are problematic, the kind of response that you received is very, very common, like the kind of like death threats, and because it's been a few guests that we've had on the podcast that have been outspoken about any issues like sort of like feminine, like metal from a feminist point of view, etc., have received like death and rape threats, and it's just kind of a grim reality that if you're going to be outspoken about that.
Yeah, but a lot of this death threat stuff is like a domestic form of kind of couch surfing, fantasy sport. I would say. I mean, I'm not saying there is no substance to it. Sometimes there is, but I think the majority of it is just like armchair philosophy.
No, I definitely think that it probably wouldn't, and I certainly hope that it wouldn't translate to any kind of like real world actions. It was just kind of like, it's still not a very pleasant thing, I would imagine, to experience.
Of course, it's not pleasant. I'm just, yeah. And anyway, I started. I think my first writing on music was very long time ago. It was like maybe 2005, and it was on Björk. And I don't think I've ever written anything else after that. And then in the late 2000s, early 2010s, I got sucked into a more ambient-y kind of metal, like the kind of like Mono, Locrian, this kind of stuff. And then I wrote an essay on Locrian in 2013, which was commissioned by Michael O'Rourke, who Daniel mentioned, for another black metal theory symposium, but this never got published. And this paper got published like I think 2 years ago. So it was probably one of my publications that waited the most, like 9 years later it was published or something. Just ridiculous. And in the meantime, I published. This was a little bit before Daniel invited me to do the book, and before the Dublin Symposium, I did publish a couple of essays on some kind of young Bulgarian bands in a website that was called Hidden Harvest, which is now defunct. And that was kind of like, I never really thought I'm gonna do a music book or anything like that. So for me, this was quite unexpected, and now I kind of see more potential for me in this line of work. But I'm not a musicologist, neither I'm a musician. I come from the world of philosophy and critical theory, but I do have already kind of pertinent publications. I eventually published the Lockery piece in metal music studies, and now the book, and I have some other things lined up, etc., etc. But I come from, you know, more the angle of, I think there's this debate of about the fun academic. So I kind of come from this background, and I've always been a little bit anxious about it because I am not a professional musician, I'm not a musicologist. I want to say interesting things about the music I like, but you know, I have to accept the limitations of who I am, etc., etc. But having said that, here we are with the book.
I think it's interesting with metal though, because it is like a community thing as well, and there's so many like sort of codes that are associated with it, like, you know, like band t-shirts, like battle jackets, stuff like that. There's like a whole sort of like, it's like, oh, what's the word?
Shibboleths. Shibboleths.
I don't know what that means.
Well, you know.
Yeah, that's what I'm trying to say. I think it's there are more interesting things to approach metal with than just like the music, which is why I think it's quite cool. Like I think it's quite different to some other forms of like other genres of music in that way.
Well, we went to liturgy last night, and Stanimir was commenting that you know, if the concert took place in Sofia or anywhere else, really, like the crowd would look the same. So there's a kind of globally sort of shared set of signifiers and outfits and so forth. So you can, you know, I was once in you know, in Lisbon, and I just sort of chanced upon a grindcore show, and went in there and saw the show, and you can just hang out with the people, and like, you know, there's this kind of bond with metalheads the world over, which you can just immediately kind of switch on. So
yeah, I have to say in this regard, the black metal communities are very much like gay clubs and gay communities, because, you know, when you go to a gay bar, you immediately recognize the archetypes and who's doing what and looking for who and etc. And when you go to a black metal concert, already by the t-shirts and the tattoos, you can kind of pin somebody on a certain kind of quite specific political spectrum. So it's not that different in terms of, you know, self-encoding when you start, you know, comparing subcultures, right? You know. So even in that respect, black metal is gay. You know?
What was the recent revelation we had about like kind of like somebody else on the podcast made a likeness between like the whole like black metal stage names and drag personas not so long ago? Was it Bill, when we had Bill, the author of some like So Will Be Bury?
It might have been, yeah.
And he was also trying to kind of you know, use black metal as a kind of like tool to push a political agenda, and seeing the potential for radical politics and achieving socialist ends through.
Yeah, his was different. His was more as like black metal is inherently right wing due to like the people who started it, but the things about it you can like analyze and then apply them to like left wing politics, which is kind of cool.
Yeah.
But maybe Jackie can speak a little bit about how she started illustrating and doing work for black metal.
I mean, yeah, I'm definitely not an academic by any sense. It's just kind of like if you take a Venn diagram of my two favorite things, like metal and design, and then you put them together, this is like my dream project. I've done stuff in the past, like my thesis project in college was like just a book about metal. I was like, I like metal and I like books, so we're gonna do that. And then I've always loved doing books specifically. And so this is like the first time I've ever done a book that's like been available for the public. It wasn't just like a personal project, which is exciting. And I've done like, you know, like logos for bands and album art and t-shirt designs, like starting in college. And I did a while like stint at Invisible Oranges doing like the visuals for their articles. And I've done like the program guides for Maryland Death Fest a number of years. And I was invited to talk at Grimposium in Philly a couple of years back, and that was super cool because it was like a panel about like art and design in metal, and the kind of like star of that panel was Dan Seagrave, who has done every famous black metal or death metal like cover ever, because he's like an incredible painter. And that was the first time I was ever involved in anything kind of like even remotely academic, and I was like equal parts terrified and excited because I was like, I get to sit next to Dan Seagrave and my friend is moderating this, but I was also really nervous. So I was just drinking straight whiskey on the train down because I was like, I don't like talking in front of people. Oh my God. But yeah, and then I think I don't remember how these guys found me, but I'm glad they did, because this, like I said, this was like a dream project. And even though it took blood, sweat, and tears and years to come out into the world, I'm still pretty proud of it, and I hope it gets me some more book business because it was great.
So what were your roles, and was your role more to do with the design and like curating like the art side of it?
I did not have anything to do with the actual art. That was contributed by the artist, but I am responsible for the book and how it looks and like all of the decisions around, just like the physical object. And we definitely wanted it to be as shiny and as insane and holographic and rainbow as possible. So our paperback reflects that pretty well.
Yeah, that's pretty cool. Because I do really like how it's so like eclectic as well. Like just like the difference of the articles, they all cover different things, and then like the actual art is really cool. Like I really like the black metal like teacups with like
Yeah, they
the
were
corpse
cool.
paint and stuff on it as well. Like, how were there things when you were like curating like all the articles and all the art? Was there like a way you wanted it to flow, and were there things you had to reject, or how did that like vetting process sort of happen?
I think that's probably a question for Daniel and Stanimir. They are the ones that kind of found the artists and kind of made the decisions behind like what to choose and like in what order.
I mean, finding the stuff, I think it was just a case of like looking online, looking at artists, seeing the stuff that they're sharing and liking. I mean, there's so much. It's like this rabbit hole. And once you start, you just kind of tumble down it. And there's so many artists kind of doing incredible creative things with the black metal aesthetic. So we kind of felt with this book that it would be great to sort of gather some of that, sort of show a kind of spotlight on what's going on that people can kind of then explore on their own. I think one guiding principle that I wanted was sort of like a sense of fun. Like you mentioned the teacups, black metal has this kind of weird sense of humor, like from the very beginning, whether it's like Immortal kind of running through the forests, it has this kind of camp, sort of ridiculous kind of self-mockery to it, which some black metal fans and bands kind of disavow and sort of, no, this is deadly serious. But obviously it can't be. It's just a lot of it is just so absurd and so bizarre. So what we wanted to do is kind of lean into that sense of fun, whether it's sort of like the Elvis, or whether it's,
Teacups.
I mean, the teacups is a great example. I really want to buy some of them.
That before the podcast.
And then so just kind of like a sense of the fun, the carnivalesque, the comedy, the silliness. And again, it's a fine line because some people are kind of laughing at black metal from the outside. Some people are laughing it from the inside. We definitely, I mean, this is definitely not a project which sort of pokes fun at black metal in a sense from the outside. You know, I describe this book as a love letter to black metal. You know, we're fans of it, we love it, and we love like the silliness of it. We love the kind of ridiculous aspect of it. And as for the flow of the book, it was really a question of sort of sitting down. In fact, I was at a union conference, at a union retreat. So my wife is, you know, was a union rep at the time. So they had this retreat, you know, an hour or so outside of Montreal. So we went there, and it was the first snow of the year. So in the city, it was not snowing yet, but in the mountains, it was already started to snow. So I remember I just, and there was a power cut. So this is classic in Quebec. There's always a power cut. So basically we got there, it was pitch dark. I had to go and find the room with the torch. So the next day also there was no power. So this was very black metal. You know, I was sitting there, it was snowing, there was no light, and I was kind of like flicking through my laptop to kind of put together the table of contents, you know, what goes where, what follows where. And that's always like kind of like a sort of instinctive process. It's kind of like a gut feeling of like, well, this would look good together, that would look good together. And then we had to make some adjustments and so forth. And the book also like has a magic spell in it. So we had to sort of make sure that there was you know, a beginning, a perfect middle, and then an end. So it has to be, there had to be two equal sides to it. In the end, we had too much material, so unfortunately some had to be left out. But I think it was just amazing to see, you know, the kind of journey that sort of the book creates. And I think Jackie did an incredible job of sort of like, you know, it sort of has this sort of futuristic direction. So as you get sort of towards the second half of the book, you have this sort of like this kind of glitchiness. There's an almost kind of matrixy feel to some of the sort of green art. And so we wanted it to have this sort of, you know, what is black metal going to be in the future? What can it be next? Where's it going next? So this kind of openness to the future, because black metal in many ways is very traditionalist. It's like medievalist. It's all about like Vikings and historical nostalgia, and it sort of looks back to the past with this rose-tinted glasses, and that's kind of the conservative aspect to it. Like, let's go back to simpler times, you know, the Middle Ages, the Vikings, feudalism, blood and soil, all this stuff. But we wanted to definitely have a kind of like more sort of futuristic, like, where can it open up? Where can it like go next? How can it be different? How can black metal be, you know, in a sense, a pathway to the future? I mean, you mentioned Bill's book, and I love that book, because that's also like, you know, I feel that's kind of like, how can black metal be a tool to create a better world? So how can we take this tool from people, or some people who, you know, would be conservatives or are indeed fascists? How can we take this tool and use it for our own ends? And like, you know, it's not just it's not an original idea that we're having, or he's having in a way, because in a sense what this book has represented is we're meeting so many people across the world who share this. So in a sense, it's, you know, we're just sort of messengers of something, this thing which is happening to this genre. And I think it's fascinating to kind of think about why this genre, why did black metal become, or always was, but certainly has become, this kind of area for sort of leftist sort of thinking, anti-fascist action, socialist organizing. You know, it's I'm surprised by it too.
I 100% didn't predict it. You were mentioning that there was like a magic spell sort of like encoded.
Oh yeah, it's at the front. It starts with like, I'm not gonna do it. I don't want to bury the book. So yeah, it's about like you bury it and stuff. I'll show you it in a bit. It's throughout the
Oh, okay.
But yeah.
I was just more wondering like if occultism was something that was an interest for you or not, you know, or not, because like sometimes like some people have different approaches to it, whether they take it absolutely serious. Other people kind of take the weird, like Grant Morrison-esque approach to it, and I was just wondering if that's like something that you.
We went through a phase of being obsessed with Grant Morrison, so
Well, I mean, occultism is just one of the kind of several catchphrases or keywords or even passwords of black metal. So I mean, usually there's almost like kind of this confusing kind of crisscrossing between occultism, mysticism, Gnosticism, et cetera, et cetera. So I'm not really sure the occultism is the word, because I believe, like, I mean, a lot of fans, for example, often, and it's not a critique, it's just, it's just what it is, often kind of confuse, I don't know, Gnosticism with mysticism. Because, they're not, or esotericism with Gnosticism, because these are not necessarily the same thing, right?
Gnosticism being like a more like transcendental philosophy, like you have the Cathars or something like that.
It's a really more of a religious movement than a philosophy, I would say. But all of this, the reason why I said this thing about the terminology, jumping on your question, is that all of these terms, the way they function, I think in black metal in particular, from what I've seen throughout the years, it doesn't really matter to which word which word you stick to yourself. What matters is that it's a highly personal approach. So, for example, if you claim that I'm a black metal fan and I am esoteric or gnostic in some way, that necessarily implies a very personal reading of what is Gnosticism, for example, or mysticism, or some kind of mysterial ritual or anything like that. And that's and in this sense, black metal as a community, as a global community, even of fans or even professional musicians and journalists and whatnot, is very similar to the early disorganized Christian movement, because black metal fans do not subscribe to, I don't know, I mean, in black metal there is no Chalcedon, there is no the Council of Nicaea, right? There's no Christian dogma that's being stamped onto everybody, and that's why when you say occultism or Gnosticism or what have you, it's like this very personalized thing. Having said that, there is, of course, communal kind of censorship. If you want to go from, I don't know, a death metal concert to a, I don't know, drum metal concert, and the way you pass visually, well, you might be included or excluded, right? It just depends on how you look like, what kind of stuff you're saying, etc. But I think what's important here, at any rate, is that so, for example, if you see occultism in black metal, it's very personalized, it's very individualistic at some level. I think in the book there's plenty of mysticism, and maybe that's the better word. And one funny thing about the mysticism in the book is, just because one part of the book is kind of academic-ish, the language of it is kind of cryptic, sometimes quite deliberately so. And it's almost functions as an alibi to have people speaking in a very imperceptible kind of way. But at some level, language is Gnostic technology to begin with. So I think the book has that, but there's also very readable pieces. So it's a mixed bag of to wrap it up, I think it's a mixed bag of esotericism and exotericism. It's both.
That was a far deeper answer than I was expecting.
I just wanted to get back to the collaborative aspect, because I know you had like the compilation as well, and then I know you had like the release show with like Imperial Triumphant, and then also there's like this the corpse paint competition that's going on at the moment. Like, are the three of you like the core team behind all of it, and how have you navigated all that? And
well, the shows and the other events in New York were in February. I think Jackie can speak a little bit about the show.
Yeah, that was, I mean, as far as just kind of collaborating, like we kind of split things up. you know, like more or less based on what we like, what the end goal is, or like who might know people or whatever. And because, you know, like I lived in New York City forever, I figured that, you know, like if we want to do a book launch kind of weekend, you know, we want to cap it off with a show. Like I know, you know, the guy that does the booking at St. Vitus, and I know, you know, some of the bands that we had play. And so, you know, when I reached out to everyone was like really, really stoked to play. And they're like, absolutely. And so it kind of came together like surprisingly easily. And, you know, like the kind of like end, like cherry on top was Imperial Triumphant agreeing to play, which I knew would draw people because, you know, like you want the phrase being butts and seats, although there's no seats in St. Vitus, but you want people to show up also because we were going to like, it wasn't just going to be like a self-congratulatory thing either, because that's ridiculous. Like we wanted to make sure that the money that we raised was going to go to somewhere. So we donated to the Alifornia Center, which is the Center for Trans Youth in New York City. And so that was like, you know, it was like, here's our book, but also like, let's do some good for the community that we're trying to promote. All of the bands except for Imperial Triumphant had trans or gay or queer members or women. And so they were all kind of like within the theme of the book, but also Imperial Triumphant I chose because they are, you know, they've got these incredible costumes. They have this incredible kind of like aesthetic to their performance. And they, I think, are pushing even the sound of black metal into what I think the future of black metal will be. And that's why I chose them as our like headliner, because I feel like they are, you know, encapsulating like one of the feelings or concepts or themes of the book. They're just kind of pushing things into the future away from, you know, the traditional and the expected into something that is a little bit more exciting and edgy and fresh. So that show is also on Super Bowl Sunday for which is a big deal in America. And I will tell everyone who listens that I got a sold out show in New York on a Super Bowl Sunday. So I'm very proud of that because people care about sports an incredible amount. So it was a good time.
Very impressive. So as we've mentioned before, we like host like an underground 3 hour long like radio show. We were wondering if between the three of you, you would like to pick some things off like the playlist of like all those sort of like artists that have collaborated with you that we could maybe play on the radio that you guys would, you know, kind of you'd like to put out there and have like some of our listeners be exposed to.
Yeah, we can definitely do that. So we can send you a list of songs. So tell us how many you want, and then
We usually say 5, but as there's like 3 guests, it seems a little unfair to just limit you to like 5 between you. So just maybe like 3 each.
okay. Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, we'll do that.
Awesome, but thank you.
That was a bit sooner launched in.
Yeah.
Usually we do that like towards the end. I was going to say something else.
I mean, I can, you know, I'll narrowing down 3. I can choose 3 songs from the compilation, so it's 3 out of 130. I have to be selective, but yeah. So the compilation is another thing that just kind of, again, sort of ballooned out of control in terms of reaching out to artists, getting people saying yes, but then you reach out to an artist and they're saying like, oh yeah, I really want to be part of this, but have you contacted XYZ and so forth? Like they might also be interested. So it's like, you know, there's been this, every project that we've been involved in, whether it's like, you know, whether it's the show or whether it's the book or whether it's the compilation or the corpse painting competition, it's just a case of you know, there's this network out there, there's this community out there, and there are also so many other different organizations that are kind of working on anti-fascist black metal, queer and trans black metal, you know, but even beyond black metal in general, electronic music. So I think part of the, you know, the main upside for me with this project has been the kind of community aspect of just kind of meeting people, finding that there's a shared bond in this sort of hell world that we live in which, you know, the world is burning, politics, fascism is on the rise again. It's like, it feels often very daunting, like what can an individual do? So like, I think one sort of lesson we've kind of been learning with this is like you do what you can. So if you're a cultural critic, you can write an article which is sort of, if you're somebody who can put on a show, you can reach out to, so, you know, in your small domain, you can make a difference. And this all contributes to like a wider sort of movement, which hopefully has some effect, you know, even if you're just in a niche field like black metal, you can still make a difference.
Yeah, because we get into like, when we get into politics in the podcast, it gets like quite sort of depressing. I know you mentioned that the world being on fire and that, and it's like seeing all those photos of like New York when it's like literally orange. Like obviously we're in like North Wales, so we've only seen the photos of it, but like it is pretty crazy. But it is, we do always try and ask people like what they find hope in, and I think that's like a good answer.
Yeah, because you kind of beat us to it.
Yeah, you beat us to the thing there. But I wondered what you two also find hope in as well.
I mean, just that's a hard question because it's kind of slim pickings in the States right now. But I mean, it could be something as simple as going for a walk in the woods, which is very easy to do in Vermont, where I live now, because it's beautiful. And that always kind of makes things feel a little bit more manageable, I think, because it's like, you know, you're just escaping into the forest and it's like, okay, like this feels peaceful right now and I can kind of hold on to this. And just other things like where people are showing like care in kind of like their communities. And like I'm part of a mutual aid thing here in like my town, like my neighborhood specifically, where you will ask for something that you need and like people will like kind of gather around and like get it done, whether it's money or, you know, cat food or like whatever. And then which brings me to like the last point I want to make about that, which is also kind of about the show that I put on. The woman who was in she is in Gray Flesh Tethered, who was our opening band. She, for whatever reason, decided to just bake a bunch of loaves of bread and just give them out to people at the show. And I was like so touched by that gesture. It was just like, here's a bunch of bread that I made and just please have some. And it was really good. She gave me like a cinnamon brioche loaf and I was like, I went home and I ate it and I was like, Jesus Christ, she's talented. And but it's just like those tiny things where it's like someone is doing something completely thoughtful and caring for strangers, I think is really like the kind of thing that like buoys me through life when it gets really dark.
I didn't make a Peter Kropotkin joke about the
I
bread.
was thinking that it's like a left-wing bread joke there somewhere.
Oh.
I don't know. I think I'm a fatalist by birth. I don't know. I think probably my first breath in the world was like, you know, fatality, you know, or something. I've never felt hope about anything in my life. I don't know, and I don't like hope for some strange reason. But I don't say this with a bad feeling or heart. It's just there's something so positive and recharging about fatalism in me. I don't know. I don't feel it like some kind of weird existential or cosmic drama. It's just me. I can't explain it, you know. So but the reason why I say fatalism is because it's not pessimism. There is a difference between fatalism and pessimism. I think fatalism is a form of there's a form of optimistic fatalism. I think I work along these lines and think along these lines. But just like optimism as such is not a thing that I can actually, you know, conceptualize or wrap mind around. I think the kind of depressing thing for me politically is that I mean, whether it has to do with black metal and politics or not, it's just very briefly the fact that on the micro level, I think Jackie has a point. On the micro level, there's a lot of hope, and people can make a difference and change on the micro level. But once you try to extrapolate and go on a more ambitious kind of macro level, things get sideways, and it's not really about whether you're an optimist or a pessimist or you have hope or anything. It's really more about the limitations of the existing political infrastructure, and this is where you just hit the ceiling, and you're like, yeah, I'm an optimist, so now what? Right? So that, and in this context, it's very hard to not lose hope. But I don't think it's like I think it's like a global problem from what I can sense in the zeitgeist. And I think our book is a way of community building. I think Daniel was right about it. But I don't know if we can make something bigger politically out of it. I mean, I'd like to, but I feel like we can't at some level. But that's all right. As this is I think in design is also a form of philosophy. Less is more. So.
It's interesting. So that's kind of touched on after kind of like speaking to Dawn Radio. I started reading like some anarcho-nihilist books like Desert by Anonymous and things like that. And in that book, the author talks about like how the abandonment of hope is almost liberating in a sense, because you're like holding out in this almost like religious sense for this global proletarian uprising that's going to eventually sweep away capitalism and stuff. And it's kind of like, and once you abandon that hope, you can then kind of marshal your own strength and resources to actually achieve, even on a small scale, some positive change. And kind of
there's a whole string of writers, and there's a whole tradition of writing along these lines. I mean, it's represented in the book. For example, in Black Metal Rainbows, there's an essay by Elodie Lesueur, and that kind of line of thinking is represented by her chapter where she works with Émile Cioran. And Cioran's philosophy is very close to what you just described.
I also think that we talked about hope and we talked about optimism, we talk about the future, but also like I think one theme of this book is also like joy and pleasure in the present. Like I think taking pleasure in black metal is something like nobody is a black metal fan because they hate it, and yet talking about like the joy it gives them and the pleasure it gives them is some sort of taboo, because black metal has to be all about grimness and pain and misery. And yet for me, in school, in college, black metal was kind of the genre where I made friends, where we would sort of hang out, have parties, even go to the woods and have black metal parties in the woods. I don't know. I think partly because it has this paradox to it, where it sort of like tries to disavow all the good things in life, but is in fact sort of jealously kind of guarding them. So we just wanted to kind of bring out that aspect of it, and hopefully we can't know what kind of larger effect this book will have, but it has been like wonderful to see the joy it has been giving people around the world. On our Instagram account, people, they get the book, they sort of post pictures of it, they the sort of shininess of the object. We wanted like an object which gave people joy, which sort of like was a kind of pleasurable object to have. This is kind of like a special edition, custom edition we made with sort of jewels and stuff. So kind of like taking some sort of pleasure in the sort of aesthetics and the beauty of black metal is something which we don't know what effect that has, but like maybe it's something positive in a sort of sea of negativity, and a field which celebrates negativity as a sort of matter of course.
Yeah. Well, I know when I first like found out about the book, like, and like a big part of me coming to terms with like being trans and stuff like that, it was a really cool thing to find, and then finding other like trans people that are into black metal and stuff like that. And I think the community is kind of cool as well, because Ross from Dawn Treader, like we had him on the show like episode 3, and then we sort of like maintained like a friendship with him, and like when he got signed to his new label, he sent us like a care package and stuff, and it's like the community and like black metal is like, and like lefty black metal is really cool. I think that's quite a hopeful thing.
Yeah, no, I agree. We've made some very good friends like through just chatting about politics and black metal on the internet.
Yeah.
Yeah.
A nice way to end.
It is like a very
So-
nice way to wrap up.
Obviously, we usually end as well with like what sort of things you want to plug. So obviously, there's like the book, but I can't remember off the top of my head when the competition ends for the corpse paint.
The competition ended, but anyone is welcome to keep sending stuff if they want. You know, we'll put it online. I don't know, people sometimes ask like what the future holds, and what the future holds, at least for us, is a bit of a rest, because like this has been like years of putting this together, so we need to take a breather from it. But as you see, you know, as you've mentioned, there's like the compilation that it sort of generates, I think it has generated its own universe in a way. So my hope is that in some form or another, there will be more. So what that form will take, we don't know yet, but I think we have a tightly knit team, you know, with like Jackie, Stanimir. We had a book launch the other day in Montreal, where the Wesley Cunningham Kloss, the artist of the compilation, showed up and sold some of his zines. So I think there will be more to come from us.
I certainly look forward to.
Would there be
whatever it
anything
is.
in the UK? Because we're always
Is somebody who wants to organize an event for the book at SOAS in London? So, but I think that might happen next year. We're not in a hurry. I think we might have a couple of European events next year.
Okay. But
So
we're-
very excited.
that's
we can
very-
reach out. Yeah.
Fingers crossed for that London event, and we will try and travel down for it if it happens.
Yeah, big.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Okay.
Thanks so much.
Thank you for the interest. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you so much.
No, that's totally fine. We got distracted because like we're recording in a basement and somebody's like ran and there was like loud booming.
Yeah,
overhead,
it's,
so-
we thought maybe you'd heard it, so
But no, thank you very much for appearing on the podcast. It's been a really interesting conversation.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Black metal for everyone.
Yes.
Absolutely.